What up, y'all? It's your hometown hero, the real Adam Coleman, and you rocking with Tru-ID. So listen, man, you and I both know that there's a lot of brokenness in this world, and pain and suffering is just something that none of us are strangers to one way or the other. But as I say all the time, all worldviews are not created equal. And when it comes to navigating the rough edges of life, the worldview you subscribe to has a whole lot to do with how you understand, come to grips with, and or overcome suffering and evil in the world. And just like we did in the last video, I want to take a second to look at a clip from an interview in which comedian Aries Spears is giving his take on the problem of evil in the world and why he's considering leaving God alone and turning towards atheism. So check that out.
And I don't know whether God is black or white, but here's my thinking. Let's just say, okay, God is black. And people, slaves were praying and, oh my Lord, 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 Lord. Freedom gonna come one day. Well, freedom is inevitable. We weren't gonna stay slaves forever. So you mean to tell me 400 years later, finally being free, now we want to go, he might not come when you call, but he's always on time. If 400 years is on time, that's tardiness. So if God is real, he's because he's late. And if God is white, you putting all your praise into this white God who clearly didn't give a fuck about you either. So which is he? Is he black? Is he white? If he's black, why wouldn't you look out for your own people? If he's white, now you showing love to this figure who kept you locked up. None of that makes sense to me.
Now, oh man, so on the surface of it, I just say that Spears here is just making a bad argument. I mean, obviously the whole if God is black or if God is white way that he framed his argument, I mean, it's just a false dilemma, man. Now, I already addressed how to deal with false dilemmas in my video responding to well-known rapper T.I. So I'll just put the link in the description and people can just check that out to understand where I'm going with this. But the bottom line is this, though. If Aries Spears framed his argument as A, if God is black, then why didn't he look out for his own? Or B, if God is white, then why pray to a God that doesn't care about you? Then again, that's just a false dilemma. And we can defeat it by simply pointing out that both A and B are wrong. Those if statements concerning whether God is black or white, I mean, that's the weak link right there in Spears' argumentation. So we can just simply say that the answer is C. God is neither white nor black. He's a transcendent spiritual being, and those racial categories of white and black, as Spears uses them in his argument, neither of those categories work in terms of who and what God is. So that whole argument just falls apart. However, I do want to give Spears kind of the benefit of the doubt as we work our way through what he's saying he's struggling with. So what we can draw from Spears' false dilemma is that he's really concerned about justice. I mean, bad things happen to enslaved persons of African descent, and something should have been done about it to make it right. I think that's really what he's trying to get at, this notion of justice. Now, as a concept, justice can actually be understood a number of different ways, but as I'm using it here, I'm simply referring to rendering to or giving humans what they are due, what they deserve, or the notion of things being made right, that kind of thing. Now, of course, the concept of justice is all throughout the Bible. I mean, whether it be through the Old Testament prophets like Micah or even the teachings of Jesus himself, it's pretty clear throughout Scripture that justice is a feature of how God expects us to deal with one another in this life. I say that justice is a concept that's grounded in what Jesus taught as being the two greatest commandments of Scripture, which is to love God and love your neighbor. As Dr. King put it, justice is what love looks like in public. And then, of course, the Scriptures have a lot to say about the matter of ultimate justice, where God brings about either final or eternal reward or consequences for what we do while we're here. Now, I've got other videos in which I get more into depth with that, and you can find the link to those in the description of this video. But just like my last video, I'm not so much interested in defending the biblical worldview here. What I'm trying to take a look at is considering Aries Spears' angle of looking at atheism in light of suffering. So as far as this concept of justice is concerned, let's explore what the atheist worldview has to offer. Now, first of all, Spears is obviously pretty perplexed or ticked off about the kinds of injustices people commit against each other in this life. And he sees looking to God for justice as a waste of time, since according to Spears, God is unreliable or tardy, as he put it. Okay, so hypothetically, let's say we live in a godless universe. It seems to me that the only beings left to bring about any sort of justice would be us. And quite frankly, I don't see any way that as human beings could possibly guarantee the kind of justice that Aries Spears is looking for in this life. And on top of that, any hope of ultimate justice pretty much would go out the window as well. I mean, just think about it. I mean, we all know nobody's perfect, right? We're all morally flawed. So with our track record over the course of human history of having zero success at personal moral perfection, and on a collective level, we're repeatedly building societies, systems of government, economies, courts, and so on, in which corruption is inevitably getting in the mix. Why in the world would we think that we're finally going to get it together now and ensure justice amongst ourselves 100% of the time from here on out? Just good luck with that. But then too, even setting moral imperfections aside, humans aren't infallible. We make honest mistakes. Even in our legal system, honest mistakes can result in bad guys going free and innocent folks paying the price for things they didn't do. The reason our court systems have appeals processes is because we know that we screw it up from time to time. And even with those appeals processes in place, sometimes our system still fails us. I remember back when I was in college, I had a professor in one of my law classes who would say that in America, we don't have a justice system, we have a legal system. His point was that in saying that we have a justice system, that would mean that people get justice in every instance the system is involved. However, since the imperfect humans that make the system run are incapable of making sure that justice is served in every single instance, the best thing we can do is uphold a legal system where the rule of law gets us as close to justice as we possibly can. But even at our best though, there are just some things in life, some injustices or instances of suffering that are just beyond our ability to make them right. Let's just take slavery, for example, since that's what, Aries Spears brought up. Even if America decided to, one way or another, grant reparations to all the descendants of enslaved persons, there are just some things that money or material reparations just can't make up for. Just think about the mothers who had to watch their children being carted off and sold down the river. Or that father who can't protect his daughter from being raped and beaten by their enslaver. Seriously, how do you assess the value or put a price on that kind of trauma? We all know that there are limitations to being human. And I would say that among them is our ability to bring about justice, as far as what it would take to truly make things right. There's just some levels of justice that our arms are just too short to reach. Now, concerning that concept of ultimate justice or justice beyond this life, I think it's pretty much a no-brainer that atheism can't offer us anything there. Now, first off, if the natural world is all there is, and our human journey basically boils down to our time here on Earth, from womb to being worm food, then when this life is over, there's nobody to receive justice, whether it be to be punished for wrong that they've done or to have things made right for wrongs that were committed against them. Again, with the example of slavery that Spears brings up, there was enslaved persons who were born enslaved, were subjected to forced labor, torture, and trauma their whole lives. And then they went to their graves without ever getting anything close to justice in this life, whether it be receiving any material payback for their toil and struggle or seeing the oppressors punished for what was done to them. On the other hand, there were some enslavers who really balled out in the antebellum South their whole lives. There's a reason why in the 19th century the phrase King Cotton came about. At one point, cotton produced with slave labor was about 60% of America's exports. So to say there was big business is obviously an understatement. Cats made some real money off of it. The point is, there are folks from that era who kidnapped, beat, and enslaved their way toward a massive material wealth, which was passed down for generations, who never lifted a finger to right the wrongs committed against those African enslaved persons. Instead, they died fat and happy, and that was it for them. No punishment, no restitution from them to the people that they exploited. Really, in a sense, death for them was like the final escape hatch from being held accountable. They got off scot-free. Now, somewhat of a side note, it's pretty doubtful that justice exists on its own as some sort of immaterial force or entity out there somewhere, as some philosopher type suggests. It seems like a pretty incoherent idea to me. Honestly, I don't even know what it would mean for justice to exist on its own. But if it did somehow, justice itself wouldn't have a mind with which to interpret how a person lives and decide who is rewarded for something or who gets punished. Now, if that were the case, then you might end up with a weird situation where justice rewards or punishes the wrong people. Like it might punish the enslaved person for slavery while rewarding the enslaver. Just really imagine how jacked up that might be, right? But anyway, just to put a bow on this point, there's good reason to think that in turning to atheism, Aries Spears would be looking for justice in all the wrong places. In a godless world, you can still have all the same injustices Spears mentioned still going on. But there's nothing about atheism that would solve that problem and guarantee justice in this life. And on top of that, any hope of things ultimately being made right is gone. Okay, so in this next clip, we'll see that, in my opinion, Spears seems to have left his best for last as far as his attempt to critique religion or offer up reasons for his skepticism. But before I get to that, I just want to say I appreciate y'all for riding with me as we break all this down. Now, if you found this video to be interesting or helpful, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button, share the video, and if you feel so inclined, consider supporting through the Patreon link that's in the description of the video. With that said, let's take a look at this last clip from Aries Spears' interview and see where that takes us.
But then I pick up a newspaper and I read how a 4-year-old girl gets kidnapped, raped, and murdered. Now, I know they say God gives man free will. If God gives man free will, okay, I get that. But like the mafia, women and kids should be off limits.
Yeah.
You know, it's nothing more terrible. I have 3 kids. My youngest daughter is 5. Love her to death. I couldn't imagine what it must be like for a child to feel the terror of I'm losing my life. Where's my mother and father?
Yeah.
Someone help me. And if God can't step in at that moment and go, look, I know I give man free will, but this is a kid. All bets is off. So that doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
Too much of what goes on in this life does not make sense to me. I don't know if
So, real talk, man, that's some heavy stuff right there. I mean, I'm a father of 4 myself, so just imagining any of my kids in that situation is enough for me to really feel the emotional weight that Aries Spears is getting at there. Now, honestly, just keeping it 100 with you, when I first started getting into apologetics, I probably would have responded to somebody raising this kind of concern or objection a bit differently than I would now. Sometimes you can have the book knowledge to reason your way through difficult issues like these, but then life hits you in a certain way where you have to really apply that knowledge. And in doing so, you find yourself navigating these kinds of things in a deeper or at least a different way than you probably would have otherwise. And for me, that's exactly what happened a couple years back when my dad passed away unexpectedly. He was a 66-year-old vegetarian who ate right, exercised, and all that. But then one day, on my parents' anniversary actually, he collapsed due to a heart condition that he didn't know he had, and boom, just like that, he was gone. And obviously, my whole family was devastated. And in the days leading up to his funeral, and actually even for some time after that, I just couldn't help but ask, like, God, if you're real, then how could you let this happen? You're supposed to have our back, right? Just so, when I hear people like Spears on this tip, I get it. I mean, life gets deep. And so, I try not to come at these kind of things from a distance, so to speak. I try to take into account some of the things that helped me to think through the passing of my dad as I approach these kinds of questions, and particularly the reality of human value, as I spoke about in the last video. Honestly, the reality of objective human value hadn't really hit me on such a personal or real level as when I was working my way through the grieving process concerning my dad. Now, when I think about the scenario that Spears described with the young girl being kidnapped and killed, unless something's really wrong with you, you just can't help but feel some kind of way about that. But why do these kinds of things hit us so hard on an emotional level? Well, I think there's actually a number of reasons. So, for example, our deepest intuitions tell us that, number one, that young girl in that scenario has real value that her kidnapper had no right to violate or disregard. Secondly, that person that kidnapped and murdered her ought not to have done that, because kidnapping and murder is truly wrong. And then third, anybody who does something like that shouldn't get away with it. It's like our consciences cry out to see justice in a situation like that. We can kind of think of these 3 points as being like ingredients that are baked into why Aries Spears' scenario in situations like that provoke such an emotional response. But here's the thing though. When you think about these 3 points pertaining to objective human value, moral values and duties, and justice, between my previous video and this one, I've argued that if atheism is true, then there are good reasons to think that there's no solid objective foundation or framework for any of them. In other words, I'm saying that Spears' reasons for being skeptical of God's existence are based on assumptions about human value, moral duties, and justice that can't be adequately supported on an atheistic paradigm. You take God out of the picture, then objective value, duties, and justice go with them. Which brings you back to a theme that you've probably picked up on by this point. While there is no doubt that any reasonable person would feel heartbroken about the kind of evil Spears described in his scenario with the girl and the kidnapper, is given atheism, there's good reason to say, hey, that little girl doesn't have any objective value. The person who kidnaps and murders her hasn't really done anything wrong, at least not objectively wrong anyway, since objective morality doesn't exist. And hey, if the dude got away with it, then he got away with it. We're incapable of consistently bringing about justice in this life. And on atheism, there's nothing and no one who will bring about justice after the grave. So As heart-wrenching as that scenario is, that's just how the atheist worldview cookie crumbles. So all in all, Aries Spears seems to be wrestling with some real questions and doubts in light of evil and suffering in the world, and therefore he's looking towards atheism. However, if we take atheism to its logical conclusions, then it seems reasonable to me to say that we lose some of the fundamental aspects of our moral experience, like a strong notion of human value, morality, and justice. So not only does atheism not provide the kind of solutions that Spears is looking for, it actually strips away the elements of our human experience that are essential to even understanding the problem, let alone offering us a solution. Which brings me back to where I ended my last video. If Aries Spears, or maybe some of you watching this video, are sincerely seeking answers on this issue, atheism can't help us here. We need to look elsewhere. Now, of course, as you might imagine, I would say that Christianity has what it takes to make sense of and navigate the problem of evil and suffering. The biblical worldview has all the right ingredients, if you will, to make sense of this broken world that we're in and point us toward the solution. Now, of course, I'm not going to get into all that here, but I've covered it in other videos, so I'll put the link to those in the description, along with other books and resources that I found to be helpful. But of course, with that said, y'all know what it is, man. Love God, love people, and take care of the things that God blesses you with. Peace.